for being here, and a big welcome to Sergei Tchoban in Mantova, particularly in these days when it's not very easy to travel, and we are very happy that he could join us here. Few architects today still give the drawing by hand a central role in the design process, and even less are the ones that have an interest that is such articulated and such intense. Sergei Tchoban is, first of all, an architect with two firms, Tchoban Voss, based in Dresden, Hamburg, and Berlin, and Speech, based in Moscow. Recent winner of the European Prize for Architecture by the Chicago Atheneum Museum of Architecture and Design. He's a collector of drawings and sketches in his Tchoban Foundation in Berlin of the most important artists from the 16th to the 21st century, and is himself an artist with a series of illustrations that are part of the collections of the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, the Victorian and Albert Museum in London, the Akademie der Künste in Berlin, that I think for manual ability and heterogeneity of the subjects has not many equals in the architects of his generation. Even in the plurality of the subjects he works on, two seems to be the main trajectories of research. One is represented by the portraits of cities that I think are a mirror of his very intense activity all over the world, and also testify his references in the past, among them Bernardo Bellotto and Giovanni Battista Piranesi. And then the invention drawings with imaginary and sometimes dystopic fragments of cities, words of pure fantasy, and idealized real architectures. As the series of Piranesi, the Vedute di Roma, the views of Rome, and the prisons of invention, le carceri di invenzione, that according to Marguerite Yourcenar are complementary, because the views of Rome are the representation of time, and the prisons of invention are the representation of space. I think that also the drawings by Sergei Tchoban are representative of two complementary sensibilities. The portraits of cities represents his interest towards history, and the drawings of invention represent the necessity of continuing history through the project. His lecture will be about the evolution of modern language and how this change influenced the visual character of the European cities. His work is the occasion of reflecting about the importance of knowing for transforming, acting with respect for who operated before us, according with an idea of architecture as a balancing act that I think we should never forget when we design, as we do, in the historical city. I would like to thank all the people that let us organize this event in the school. Help was fundamental for organizing the exhibition of the drawings by Sergei Tchoban that you find in the studio room in front of the library, that I invite you to visit after the lecture. I would like to thank all the students that are here today, particularly the ones of our two sections, the courses of Elisa Boeri, the section that I coordinate with Professor Chiara Baglione, and the section of Professor Federico Bucci and Luigi Spinelli. I would like to thank all the people that are connected in streaming, not only in Mantova and not only in Italy. And I thank again Sergei Tchoban for his presence here, and I give you the floor. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm allowed now to put the mask away because I think you hear me better if I'm speaking that way. So first of all, thank you very much for this invitation and for your coming, because nowadays we have a strange time. What I'm liking to speak about here is the future somehow of European town. Of course, the world is global, and our thinking today is very global. But somehow we have this heritage, we have this way of town planning thinking, and that is what we name European town. So if you go now from your university and go to Mantova, to the squares and streets of Mantova, you see very clear what European town is. There is a lot of modest buildings, nice and handsome, every one of them, and some dominants are quite huge, but have also some specified silhouettes. It goes from the big basement to the small spice, and somehow Old Town, what was combined from the samples between maybe 5-6 centuries, looks like the same monolith. It is of course not true, because this town was consists from the very, very different elements, from very, very different times, Renaissance, Baroque, and so on. Neoclassic, but it looks like the same, it looks like monolith. And already, let's say, 100 years, we are speaking completely other language. We are speaking the language what is much more modest in the detail, what is much more contrastful to itself and to the surrounding, where all laws like heavy things should be down and light things should be up, going on top. And we can imagine today huge cantilevers are going on top. So all silhouettes, materials, and the art of discussion between new and, let's say, old, between new building and its surrounding, became to be much more contrastful. And at the end, nowadays, the colleague Matteo explained me about participation of the people in the discussion about projects. And I would say everybody of you, after coming to the real architecture, to the real occupation, what you now learn, will see that the people around us, not architects, they are not so many glad about what we do. So they ask ourselves, they ask themselves, why the contemporary architecture looks like it looks. And my speech, what I wanted to show you, is somehow a thinking about why we make such buildings and how many of which buildings we can allow us to do. What I think is most important, because the balancing in the architecture, the balancing in the town planning between unusual and usual, between outstanding and modest, is very important point what has followed to the result of the towns what we see around us here. The first picture what has more or less nothing to do with reality, but it's still very important, is a picture what shows like 3 layers of the town. The first layer is a normal, modest town, what everybody of us knows. The second layer is the layer of like skyscrapers of 30s, 40s, where the town became to be bigger, but still tried to speak in the old art of language. So the huge building should be like more levels of normal buildings, with the trying to bring the same structure, with the trying to bring the same hierarchy between down and up, but just to make it higher. And so we have these buildings everywhere, in Italy, in Germany, in America, in Russia, everywhere. And then the thinking of now, where the buildings became not more to be a part of this thinking. Even Aldo Rossi has spoken about analog cities, so cities where every town should create the city in itself, and the town should consist from the houses. What are the small towns? Like you have a unit in every one building, but the contemporary architecture, in fact, creates the forms, creates the language, what is very contrastful to what we had before. And that is very, very important point we have to speak about, because otherwise we don't recognize how to put in and how to create the new town with these elements of new and surrounding of old, because we will confrontate every time the opinions that it is ugly, it doesn't passful, it is not passful for this part of the city. Why? Why we are confronting with this art of meaning? I mean, everybody of us knows these kind of towns. I was born also, by the way, it's all my drawings, and what colleague Mathieu explained, I try to understand it less through the books, but more through the drawings and noticing in the towns what's really happened. And that is the town I was born. It's called St. Petersburg. It's much more north from Italy, but it is a town what was founded like a copy of Italian or French or Holland, Netherlands towns, and brought all the rules from a traditional European town to this part of Russia. So you have a lot of modest buildings, and you have some skyscrapers of that time. What are the icons of the town? By the way, this icon was made by Giacomo Quarendi, by Italian architect from Bergamo, and was created for the part of St. Petersburg where I was born. And if we notice what are the houses from which consists every European town, so you see that these houses are not somehow spectacular. We are now, by learning architecture, think every time that we will be like a part of a spectacular development of future. But if we see on this picture, you notice that it is nothing spectacular in the town of past, but it is still enormously beautiful. Why? If you look at every house of these, you don't think it is somehow very interesting from proportions. The windows are somehow different positioned. You don't see some very fine proportions in the house, but two things are very important. That is the height of the building. The building is much more human in the height, not so global in the size. And on the other side, these small details and materiality. If you come to this building now, much more closer, you see that this building is very material. If you come today to any building, you see steel or plaster or small stone, as a thin stone, but it's like a mask, our masks, on the body of the construction of the houses. But here, the body of house and the skin of house is the same. It's very important because it was possible because of energy saving of the time. It was not so strong as today, but you could see that this plaster, this brick, you can feel it. You can feel the monolithic art of this building. You can feel the finest details of this building, and you can find small differences of this monolithic body of the town. This town, it was Venice, it is already Ghent in Brussels, and if you see this building, this picture, you notice the buildings from very different times. We can not expect that are very different times where these buildings were founded. These two big buildings I've shown just now are from the beginning of 20th century. So nobody expects this building could build in the beginning of 20th century. You can send maybe 13th, 14th, 15th century, but not 20th. But it was the beginning of 20th century where historical style was still in mode, and it was, of course, perfectly combined with the surrounding buildings, with the background buildings of 15th, 16th century. But in the beginning of 20th century, in the same America, we see the situation what we now meet in every European town. So this picture of unity, this picture of unification of the town has changed, and the town became to be very different and very diverse. Diversity is good. So far, we are speaking about positive things in the life, but here you see that the building of 19th century, the buildings of now and of 30th, of 20th century became to make very contrastful and very, let's say, powerful but stressful dialogue to each other. And that is what happens now in many of European towns, and what, to be frankly, became to be also a problem between us architects and not architects. Because we are together, we can understand each other somehow. We can understand on the base of our education and the base of values we became in our studying, but the people are never the architect. They say the picture before was great and the picture after is ugly. And that is a point we have to speak about, because it is of course not ugly, but it's completely other dialogue between buildings, between styles, between shaping of bodies of the building of today. It becomes to be more and more because new industry, advertising, different heights of the building became to be in very strong and very stressful dialogue to each other. And this picture I made for the exhibition recently opened in Rome. It bases on the picture of city by Piranesi. That is Harbor Ripetta, what was demolished later, and that is the idea of European town till 20th century. So modest height, some dominated building, but they are still small and have this very special shape from heavy to light. And after beginning of 20th century, where the building became to be from completely other side, as I told already, first of all, it was tried to bring to them like the same shape as before. But of course, it was not successful enough because the height of the building, the size of the building became to be very dominant in relationship, in comparison with the small details shaping this house. That's why the language of 30s, 40s, 50s became to go longer along the finding another forms. And what we are confronting now, we speak about very different forms where, like, no any rule is more possible to say why this building is so and another building is another form. It's like a very free swimming through the forms, through the types, through the typologies of the buildings, and the aim is to find something new. But this way has, of course, some danger, because we can be very glad about the form of this building like a singular element, and this building is from the 30s. That is a Russian sample of administration of the government in Moscow. And this building by Leonidov is one of icons of constructivism. And to see them singular, we are completely glad about. We forget that this building could stay on the place of very important heritage, GUM, huge department store of beginning of 20th century, but it is not more important. But it became to be much more important if you imagine on what part and in which relationship this building would stay in the town. Then you have completely other discussion about relationship between the new language of the architecture and the surrounding of the town. And then many people who was very agree and very happy about this building like a singular element, they would say, oh, maybe it's not so nice if we see how it would stay. Because the next step, and that is the same situation, that these buildings come in the very strong confrontation with the surrounding. For example, everybody of us knows this idea of horizontal skyscrapers by El Lissitzky. Everybody like to give this as a sample of contemporary in the architecture. But maybe nobody or many very small part of people knows for which part of Moscow was creating this building. It was creating, as I already explained, for the downtown of Moscow, for the circle around the very center of Moscow. So every one of these buildings became to be in very strong contrast with the old dominance and with the old surrounding of European city of that time. So the language was interesting as itself, but it was very contrastful as a thinking in the opposition, in the neighborhood of all surrounding the architects found in the city what was made before. And I think it's a very important point because the most important question is how many of such buildings can be existing in the town. It cannot happen, or it shouldn't happen maybe, that it becomes to be an uncontrolled process. And if it is uncontrolled process, we have to be clear, and also not as an architect, but also as another people, that the process becomes to be completely else as it was before. That's, I think, very important to understand, that we have today like a point where we have to decide, can we control anything in the European town, or can we not? That is the idea of my exhibition I opened in Rome last week. The most important point of this exhibition is these etchings of Piranesi. If you see on this etching, from the first view, you think it's very harmonic view on the Forum Romanum. In fact, we see very hard contrast between antique gate, antique column, what are hardly demolished, and this Baroque church, what is staying in unhuman contrast to the antique world. So Piranesi draws this picture like a world where no contrasts, no problems are existing. In fact, is it enormous contrast what can be comparable with what we have seen some slides before. So if you see, for example, these pictures, it is like the same, but with another forms. And that should be understood before we speak about harmony of past and not harmony of today. That this harmony was made by another principles, because every one of these buildings was made with the same ornamenting, with same small details, with same principles of silhouettes, but the contrast was still enormous. That's why I proposed to imprint in this picture on the same technique. It is what's made by Piranesi, to imprint like a new world and to say that is Baroque for today. And let's speak about that. It is absolutely the same level of contrast as one between this antique gate and this Baroque church. Shall we like this one or shall we not? That is a discussion I tried to begin with this exhibition about imprint of future, because I like to say with this that the contemporary architecture is it not more like in all sense of this word, harmonic part of the city. It is something what is very contrastful to the body of the city, like this Hercules is very calm and very modest, but very perfect body, but everybody looks on this blue ball, because that is exactly the contemporary architecture. So to see the good piece of contemporary architecture, you need like a modest body, what looks like a surrounding, like a ring for diamond. If you see, for example, this picture, you notice immediately this red ball, because the surrounding is detailed, full, but very contrastful to this one body. But the body is only very small part of all landscape. That's why you notice both. You notice this world of, let's say, old harmony, but you notice this very pointed contrast. And the same doesn't happen if your world became to be very dominant. So you don't have the balance anymore between modest and explosion, and then you have a feeling that the whole picture, the ensemble, if you like, of all becomes to be out of balancing. So like here, you see this ball, no more, because every point of this picture is on the same level of importance. So you don't notice which ball is the most important. Every one of them is important, and you have chaotic relationship to this picture, like this one. So every one building, as it is, looks like very nice, but altogether it looks like chaotic, and you don't understand why this building or that building was on the place. Of course it is collage, it is not reality, but on the same time it is some kind of thinking coming now that everybody looks only about his own work, and we don't speak enough about, let's say, about the picture, what comes together from very different elements we put now in the town. And then we become such pictures of the town, what can be also interesting, and it is interesting, of course, on the own way, but it has nothing to do more with the typology of European town, but with a big importance, very fundamental way of our European culture we have since many centuries. We have these samples also in other towns of Europe. It was Tokyo, it was not Europe, but that is, for example, Oslo. And you see the same way of thinking, but every building looks like something what would be interesting, but altogether they become not any picture what speaks about this monolithic and let's say also harmonic way of understanding of town. What I believe that every outstanding building needs some of them what are not so outstanding. And also from the function, also from the, even from the budget. You have a lot of buildings in the town, old and new, what will be built on very pragmatic way. And I think the most important idea of us how to combine these iconic elements and with very all-day architectural elements as a surrounding, as a ring for these iconic structures. I show you some samples of my trying to do that. There is a river of Spree in Berlin, and it is the beginning of new building line along the East Harbor. And I believe that on this place, a quite iconic building could begin the line because we have already enough surrounding, enough modest positions in this part of town that you can come with something what would be quite outstanding. And this building becomes like a small icon on the beginning of a building line of the old harbor as the only one. And that is the idea that from the surrounding, from the modest and stable elements, growing something what becomes to be, let's say, less modest and something outstanding, like this small top building as a small skyscraper, small higher building in the skyline of Berlin. Berlin has quite modest skyline, and this building becomes to be a little bit higher and also a little bit more outstanding for the shape to give this position of something new, something unusual on the background of surrounding buildings. The idea was to bring the windows to all parts of the town, to give to the flats many different views from many different points, and to give them the possibility to look the town around, because we knew quite clear that no one higher building would come on top and would make this view not possible. Or for example, this situation also in Berlin, that you come from very modest background buildings on the street, and you come inside and you see this combination between older parts and new one on top. What are speaking this contrastful but pointed language, we have a lot, like 70% of surrounding, on only one big point, what makes this contrastful dialogue in very contemporary language between old elements and the possibility to build over them, but not to ground a new one, because we are not allowed to ground on this old building something new. If we see this picture, we see quite clear that in old language, very calm surrounding and some buildings on top, very balanced from their role in the city. And if we see this picture, we see more or less the same, but the form of the new building is completely contrastful, completely else as the dominance of earlier time. That's why, as I have chosen the shape for the building of Museum of Architectural Drawing, also in Berlin, I tried to bring in the surrounding of modest but high-quality historical buildings something that could be unusual, because this one building could be staying quite good in the surrounding of modest and good detailed surrounded buildings. So you see these details by very modest form, and the details of the facade of new building by less modest forms are speaking each other, and contrastful form brings the outstanding position on one building, but not of everyone. So only one building can play the main role, and many of them have to be like a ring around. Or, for example, this one is, has a corner position with this heavy concrete facade, and has a contrapoint to the surrounded, quite modest building of the corner. The concrete facade is still very rough and very monolithic, what I think is very important for any material, but the form is contrastful to the bigger part of surrounding, what is calm and clear in opposition to this corner. Or for example, on this picture, you see how from the modest language of earlier time, you go with a more contrastful language of now, and bring the contrapoint in the middle of corner to give to one building something unusual, let's say, in the surrounding of very modest, clear buildings. So you have these monolithic concrete elements in the contrast to brick facade, what has this feeling, what I explained before, from the materiality in the scheme of the facade, but in the contrast you are very contrapointed to the surrounding, what is completely modest and gives them the possibility to be alone and to play the main role. But of course, these buildings are the minority in all decisions what I think every architect could make. But the most buildings in our town, they are the same modest buildings what I will speak about. For example, this very nice, and I love it very much, Prospect, Street, Avenue from the town I was born, Nevsky Prospect. I asked myself later how many unusual buildings, how many very important buildings I have on this long street, 4 kilometers. And I was coming to idea that only 17 buildings, around 100 addresses, are unusual in this town, in this street. So it means that 83 buildings are very normal, and nobody noticed what kind of building it is, but every one of them was made by very good architecture, by very good architect, and created by very interesting details. So these outstanding buildings, 30%, maybe even less, but the old street behind them consists from this very, very modest road where you see every window as the same, and some frames are different for every building, but you have somehow the same scheme or the same ring goes around these iconic buildings. And I ask myself, is it the possibility today to create these materials or with details the same idea of the town as before, to say there are 30% of iconics, but the 70% should be done from the buildings. They have sensitive details, but not so much expression, but through the small details, through the small elements, you get the same feeling as before by this my lovely avenue. And I think that kind of details of the scheme, like a natural stone in Seppa in Milano, or the wonderful building by by Frank Lloyd Wright in San Francisco. Sorry. This building, Hagia Sophia, with a wonderful marble elements, they are not speaking with some style. They are speaking with a possibility of material, with a possibility of structure, with the possibility of small elements are fitting the facade structure and bringing to the facade quite interesting effects. So I show you some samples of the facade of what I made for modest building. For the buildings are not somehow contrastful, somehow spectacular. For the parts of the streets or ensembles, what are not outstanding, but they are making just with the small elements, with the small details, with materiality of stone, with materiality of depth of the building, because I think there are most important elements to bring to these modest houses, like by this picture, somehow the character to be outstanding. Like, for example, this portico or this railing. So you have small elements, but they are bringing shadows, they are bringing without any styles, without any neoclassical attitudes. They bring this depth, what is very important for the architecture also now, to make them more interesting for the eye, even by coming closer. Because you see not only square of the facade, but you see this every small detail coming to every one of us. These very, very small elements are fitting the facade structure with the texture of natural stones. That is what very, very important for everyone of building, what should be a surrounding of these icons. You see like a scheme what becomes to be interesting from the overstructure, from the difference of structures along the facade, from the curve of the structure. So these small elements are making every small house somehow interesting, like it was in the old town, that everyone has the same height more or less, everyone has the same size more or less, but everyone has this print of the facade what is very unique. And that is what I think very important. If you put the new one in the historical street, you have to ask yourself, do you like to be contrastful because you are only one in the street, or it was somebody already who was contrastful? You have to come with a modest detail, but with a elementing of them, that you bring the same small scale of the facade structuring as it was before, without to be like neoclassical or historical what was in the surrounding. I think it is very important not to, like in this street, for example, we have two heritages, to give them the possibility to have the same material, to have this very interesting and passful and interesting structure of ground floor, where you see the texture of travertine, you see the small details, so you have this individual door, and I think even you have by the city hall, you have spectacular spaces in St. Petersburg, spectacular arcades outside, but you still shouldn't forget these small elements you look on, you find by coming closer to every part of the building. Or for example, here we have this modest height of the building. You see the smallest elements are dedicating the scheme of the facades. Or, for example, here we see one house of Syrtis and one house of Now. By joining them, you don't see the very hard break through the smaller dedication of elements of the facade, of modulation of the facade, to bring them similar depths and similar small scale of the facade structuring. Or like here, through many houses before, it is already uncalm and somehow contrastful enough. So to bring the house here, from my point of view, it should be more modest in the structuring, but more fine in the detailing of the skin of everyone. Or, for example, here they are very clear forms, adding with small elements of the skin and the trees. So if you come to the tree, you see first of all the silhouette, and after that you come closer, you see the leaves. So the same the facade, you see the form before, and by coming closer you see the ornaments, and the ornament is nothing bad. It is a way to make smaller the structuring of the facade by the pragmatic forms of the building, what have most of the buildings today also. Or this layering of different elements by entrance, by the shaping of the facade, like by this building, and then you come in the entrance, you have the shaping of the entrance, your shaping of the surface, and then you come inside and have the shaping of the door lever. That is a way to make for anybody, also for not architect, our architecture more interesting to touch, more interesting to come in the dialogue, and not to feel themselves to these extremely minimalistic buildings, to feel the big distance to themselves. And the last one is this building of museum once more, because it's not only outstanding form, but also the idea of creating a very interesting skin and coming inside to the door lever on the same level of detailing, on the same level of materiality. What I believe brings us to the picture of this, where you see different buildings, you have different shapes, but through the depths of materiality, through the depths of material language, you come closer to the feeling what we have on this picture. So thank you very much, and we can make questions.
Yes. Thank you.